Kingley is dropping back at the rail, and Roadster kicks in on the outside. There's an eighth of a mile to go, and Mucho Gusto is the one to beat. Kicks away smartly to Roadster on the outside. Kingley and Visitant, but Mucho Gusto means business in the Affirmed Stakes, and he's clear by 3. A clear-cut victory for Mucho Gusto and Joe Talamo, hand-ridden late to score by 2.5.
Alright, welcome back to Haskell Profiles here on Racing Rundown. I do, again, have to apologize for the delay in a couple of these episodes. I will, again, be getting all of them out. We're going to work on a couple tonight, get those out, and you should have all the Haskell Profiles by Saturday's Grade 1 Haskell. Today we're doing Mucho Gusto, who is a horse that I can't really figure out where I would rank him, not even just in the echelon of 3-year-olds, but even in the barn of his trainer, Bob Baffert. I have always thought that Mucho Gusto was the 3rd-string horse. Then when Roadster came along, I felt that Mucho Gusto had been bumped down to 4th string, and now with the way Roadster has performed his past 2 times out, I'm now starting to think Mucho Gusto may be the better of the two compared to Roadster and himself. So Mucho Gusto still definitely does have a lot of question marks with him, but one thing we do know with him is he is very good at racetracks in California. He has won every race he's won in California except for the Los Al Futurity, when he was clearly the 2nd best horse in that race. Improbable maybe did not progress the way that we thought Improbable was going to progress from a 2-year-old to a 3-year-old, but as a 2-year-old, Improbable was very good. But Mucho Gusto, solid at the very least horse as a 2-year-old, won the Bob Hope Stakes. He's also, before I get into this, undefeated in Grade 3 races in the state of California. The one race that he did run poorly in was the Sunland Derby, and looking at the placing, you wouldn't necessarily think that it was that bad, but I tend to draw a line through that race when I look at Mucho Gusto because Joe Talamo did not put the best ride on him. I was not a fan of the ride that Joe Talamo put on Mucho Gusto in that race. I thought that he chased speed and allowed Mucho Gusto to get beat. And, I don't think that even if Joe Talamo hadn't chased his speed, I don't think that Mucho Gusto was the best horse that day. I think Another Twist of Fate was the better horse, just ran out of ground. And I think it's unfortunate. I mean, this is a completely different topic in itself, but I think it's unfortunate that the Sunland Derby is not a 100-point race, and rather is a 50-point race. But we can get into that discussion at another time, not for looking at Mucho Gusto going into the Haskell Stakes. But since losing the Sunland Derby, has won the Las Barrera, a Grade 3, and the Affirmed Stakes Grade 3s, both of those at Santa Anita, one of those at 7 furlongs, the Las Barrera, and then last time out, the Affirmed mile and a 16th. So he is a solid horse. I would liken him to Mr. Money if I had a larger sample size against, now that I think of it, I was going to say against large fields, but I would just say I would compare him to Mr. Money if I had a larger sample size, maybe even a better version of Mr. Money. But there is the thing of he's running in California, and, small fields in California are something that people put a lot of emphasis on. So I'm yet to make my full judgment on Mucho Gusto because I don't know the quality of the fields that he's running against. Again, we saw him run against Improbable in the Los Al Futurity. I would not say that Improbable is as much better than Mucho Gusto as he was back in December at that Los Al Futurity. I think that Improbable either did not progress, has regressed, or Mucho Gusto progressed. I think in either way, Mucho Gusto progressed, but I think Improbable has regressed a little bit. I mean, jury's still out on that, but we'll get into that in another video. But Sunland Derby, I completely draw a line through that. And that's his only loss in 2019. The Sunland Derby where Joe Talamo did not put the best ride on him. So heading into the Haskell, I think once again Mucho Gusto is the 2nd best horse in this race. He's one of only 2 graded stakes winners in this race, the other being Maximum Security. And remember, just a note on King for a Day, who did upset Maximum Security in that Pegasus Stakes. The Pegasus is not a graded graded race. It's a listed race. So that's why I said the only other horse in this race besides Maximum Security that is a graded stakes winner. King for a Day won that stakes race, but it's not graded. So just to clear up any discrepancies there, I think you're looking at the best horse, or second best horse, excuse me, in this race right now in Mucho Gusto. Again, I don't have a large sample size for him, and I don't really know how he would perform against a quality field. Not saying that this is a quality field. I think this is probably a similar field to the ones that he's run against in California this year, aside from the fact that Maximum Security is a much better horse than all the other. I think this Maximum Security is going to be the best horse that Mucho Gusto goes up against. I am not going to say that he's my pick. I will still stick with Maximum Security, but I think Mucho Gusto has a very, very good shot to win this race. And if he does win this race, then I would maybe say that that probably propels him to the head of the Baffert class, even with Game Winner finally getting back into the winner's circle. I have not been impressed by Improbable this year. Post Santa Anita Derby, I have not been impressed with Roadster, and I was never really that impressed with Improbable after he got beat in the Rebel Stakes. So I think you're looking at the horse that if he wins this, he could become the leader in the Baffert barn. And, you know, like I said, we keep making excuses for Game Winner. We keep saying, you know, I mean, it was this. You can't hold this against him because he was wide in the Kentucky Derby, because he ran out of ground in the Rebel Stakes, because he got beat by a better horse. I mean, he just got beat in the Santa Anita Derby. But I feel like we keep making excuses for Game Winner, and I'm wondering when we're going to stop making excuses for him and just realize that he's not the star that he was as a 2-year-old. He's still a solid horse, as we saw. He won a graded stakes race, the Losel Derby, but Game Winner, not to make this about Game Winner, but I just am thinking we're making too many excuses for Game Winner. So that being said, Mucho Gusto, Sunland Derby, I completely draw a line through that. I think that was 100% rider error. Everything else about him, you know, he does not run particularly well. I mean, he ran well in the Losel Futurity against Improbable, and I think to this point, Improbable is the best horse he's run against. Now, Maximum Security is going to take that title away from Mucho Gusto, I believe. But you're looking at a horse that is definitely improving for Bob Baffert. And even if he doesn't get a win, I think he will be my pick. My exact is going to be Maximum Security, Mucho Gusto. And I know it's a pretty weak exacta, taking the number 1 and the number 2 horse. But I am going to be taking those two. Not really sure what King for a Day is going to do. We'll get to King for a Day next, though. But Mucho Gusto, I think you're looking at an improving horse that is going to run well at the very least. And, you know, we'll see what he does from there. So, that's it for this video. Again, Mucho Gusto, I like him. I still am going to take Maximum Security over him, but I like Mucho Gusto in this spot. I think if he won, I would not be surprised. So with that being said, that's it for this video. If you want more from Racing Rundown, remember to subscribe on YouTube. Also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter, Rundown Racing. Instagram, Racing Rundown Podcast. And subscribe to the podcast. iTunes, Spotify, and just actually, I have said we were not on iHeartRadio. We are now officially on iHeartRadio. So you can go get Racing Rundown over on iHeartRadio as well. So I will see you guys for King for a Day later tonight.
Sparkyville awaiting Racing Room down at the rail as Fantastic makes a nice move outside of Mucho Gusto. They're coming to the 8th pole. Mucho Gusto lets it out a notch, trying to fend off Fantastic. A late run from Manhattan up outside of Sparkyville. Mucho Gusto's class kicks it in the final furlong, and he is turning in a stylish victory in the Las Barrera. Mucho Gusto cruises.